Hello and welcome to Success Grid Nation to this episode of the podcast. I have with me in this episode Hannah Tackett to talk about the 5 success traps that lead to burnout and how to unveil the overlooked solution that to combat burnout. Hannah is a former tech leader with 16 years of experience, now dedicates herself to coaching against burnout. Having navigated her own career, halting burnout, she empowers high-achieving women to recognize and overcome the pressures of professional life. Hannah, welcome to the Success Grid podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome to have you here with me on this episode. So, first of all, because this is the Success Grid podcast, and you have been experienced professional for more than 15 years now, so I want your definition of what success is, and you working out with other people. What do you see? Certain misconceptions around that.
Well, success is defined by, it's in the eye of the beholder, kind of like beauty. So I believe that you define your own version of success. And in my specific definition of success is that I want to make more than enough money to, cover the bills, support my family, be able to invest, have a wonderful retirement. So the basics are covered. But there are other very important things that are a part of my definition of success. And one of those is health. Health is very important to me. And then that my business supports my life rather than the other way around. And then the third, which is going to sound a little odd, is room to wander. And what I mean by that is having enough white space in my life to be able to wander through books, wander through nature, to be able to enjoy that white space and process information and really also just complete the stress cycle. So that is my personal definition of success. And I believe that every individual should really have their own, that they have clearly defined for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So what you mentioned there, we all generally associate success to money, but that's not the idea of it. But you mentioned health, because if we don't have our health, we can't work and generate whatever what it is that we want to do in business and life. So our health comes first in general, because of you neglect your health, you neglect your wealth. I think Jim Rohn said that, or someone like him. And you mentioned something very important, room for wandering. This is a good way because if we are going to be talking about burning out, we need some time to just wander without having to think about things too much, or thinking about work too much, or what's going to happen tomorrow, because we don't know. Maybe we could plan for certain things that we can do, but we don't know what will happen tomorrow. So now, in regards to burnout, okay, and this also what you mentioned, room for being in wonder is very important. Why do you think, as humans now, of course we have a lot of distractions now, social media, etc., etc., a lot of things, but what do you think is the major cause of burnout?
So there's so many causes of burnout, and I don't think I've met a person who has only struggled with one. So it's usually a collection of internal and external factors. And so the internal factors are, I like to think of as the 5 success traps, right? And those are the behaviors that we have that on one side of the coin have driven us to success, but out of balance can push us beyond success and into a burnout. And those behaviors are, I'm sure you've heard people talking about people pleasing, where, on the one side of the coin, you're making others happy, you've got a great reputation. If it keeps going too far, then you start to feel burnt out. The second is perfectionism. And that's where, the plus side is you've got amazing high standards, you're very detail oriented, people know you as the person who can get it done correctly. And then the flip side is if it's driven by fear and out of balance, it can drive you to burnout. The third internal factor is being the helper. So if you're the kind of person who sees someone on your team struggling and you jump in to help them, someone in your household needs help, you jump in and do it for them. When you start picking up all of the burdens of other people because you're driven to help, it's both a good and a bad thing. Obviously, helping people is a wonderful thing. It's a good thing, but out of balance, it can drive one to burnout. And then the fourth is overachieving, and I'm definitely guilty of this one. And that's where the minute you hit one goal, you've got the next lined up, and there's never a pause or a moment to celebrate or acknowledge or kind of bask in the goodness of hitting that goal. And that's just where you never stop. You never stop the grind. It's just constant. And then the fifth one is what sometimes I refer to as like being the nice girl, or essentially it's afraid of saying no. When you are afraid to say no to your boss, or afraid to turn down a meeting, or afraid to say no to responsibilities because you're afraid that, you know, perhaps you'll be perceived as not being a top performer, or you're afraid that maybe you'll lose your job, or, you know, whatever the fear is that's driving the behavior, it can definitely lead to burnout. So those are the external factors. Sorry, internal factors of the behaviors that we have that can lead to burnout. But then there's more than that, where there's external factors as well. And so those external factors are excessive workload, which I think is obvious, a lack of control or autonomy of around your work, insufficient rewards. So if you feel like you're not being, and that includes recognition as well. So financial rewards, social rewards, these things matter to help us have our cup be filled. Lack of community, and then mismatched values.
Mm. So
And
now,
usually it's a combination.
yeah, definitely, because like the external factors, maybe these things that we cannot control, they happen to us and we cannot control them. But the internal factors we can, like for example, being the helper also relates, I would think, to the saying no or yes all the time. You have to know that sometimes you have to put some limits on certain things, to certain things that you do, or certain people that would ask you for help, because sometimes they can do it themselves, but they are maybe too lazy to do it, and they would think that you would do it for them, and you don't want to be the pleaser for anything just because you want to help other people, and that is going to take from you, which will lead to burnout and not feeling very well at certain point. And what you mentioned is overachieving. I don't know why do we think now we are goal-seeking organisms, I guess, but we always want to go to the next goal. But sometimes, like you mentioned, we need to wander and ponder. I guess to have certain moments to just relax and maybe take a look at I don't know, the wall or the sky, whatever it is, to have a serene moment, right?
Yes, and I think that space, I think of it as white space, or if you're thinking of achievement, like we're driven to achieve, and we have a culture of hustle, and we acknowledge achievement, and we praise achievement. But the other flip side of achievement, like you have to have space to be, you have to have space to exist as a human being. And having the downtime and the white space in between big pushes, because like I feel like productivity, there's a myth that it's linear. It's not linear. Human productivity is more like the tide, right? It ebbs and it flows. And if you expect that, acknowledge that, build your life with rituals and routines to support that ebb and flow of productivity, so that you're leaning out with as much intention as you're leaning in, then you'll be much less likely to experience a burnout. And I think you mentioned, like, why are we seeing so many burnouts? Like, why are people, because it has increased. It has increased dramatically over the past 5 years. I think the worldwide COVID and shutdown definitely exacerbated that, with social isolation that causes, anxiety and depression. But beyond that, there's also the tech and the use of tech. And that's kind of infiltrating those breaks, those little miniature moments in our life. So if you have a few minutes between meetings, what are we doing? We're looking at our phone. If you have enough time on your lunch break to maybe go for a walk, what are we doing? We're checking our phone. You're going to the bathroom. What are you doing? You're looking at your phone. In bed, in bed when you're falling asleep, what are you doing? You're doom scrolling. And so all these areas that used to be natural pauses, where our brain and our body could process what's going on in our world, and those were also opportunities to complete the stress cycle. We're no longer getting those opportunities because we are engaged within tech, on our phone. We are scrolling. So we're not completing the stress cycle. We're not getting that white space. We're not getting the time to decompress. And what is going on is the stress just keeps building. And it's gradual. I feel like most people think burnout is like a switch being flipped, but it's very gradual, and it builds up over years of not managing this accumulation of stress. And so that's why that white space, those little breaks during the day, in the daily rhythm, the breaks during the seasons, why it's so important to be able to disconnect and let go, because it will actually improve your productivity. It will improve your health. It will improve your emotional and mental well-being. Just allowing yourself to take those breaks.
Definitely. Like you mentioned, being productive does not mean like I am 24/7, like doing all the things. It's like ups and downs. You cannot be all the time productive at 100% level, or I would say 120%, because that is hard. That will consume you. And then
Mhm.
after you finish work, for example, you go scrolling on your phone. In your example, that would suck the life out of any human, I guess, because you are already stressing yourself with work a lot, and then it
Mhm.
comes to social media, for example, which is something that you would usually see that is something that you do want, or you are not in that place, or whatever it is you are striving to achieve. So you will have more stress, you will feel more uh feeling not achieving what is it that you achieve. So it will stress you even more, and will you feel even more burned out of that you are not achieving what you are achieving, which is not a good place to be in. So
Mhm.
I think that we need to have some kind of a, let's say, maybe a framework or certain values for us to have, right, in order to stop being burned out, because we need to set some kind of maybe boundaries for ourselves to have certain productive hours, productive times, and at the same time, times when we are just not productive, we are just enjoying life maybe. So
Yeah.
how do we do that, in your opinion, do you think?
So there's like certain steps that you can take to end the burnout cycle, or to prevent it from happening in the first place. And the first one is to, I like to call it pursuing your yes. And what that means is being crystal clear on what you're saying yes to in your life. So if you were saying yes to certain career goals, or if you were saying yes to certain things for your business or certain objectives, then if you're very clear around that, if you're saying yes to certain things as far as your health, in terms of your family, and once you're crystal clear on what you're saying yes to, it becomes easier to say no to things that are not pushing that forward. Um, and there's also, I think, a level of just understanding. Like, I think that maybe people know, oh, being on social media all night is not good for you, but maybe there's not a clear understanding of what it's actually doing. Because you're not getting, so rest is productive. I think that that's maybe a misunderstanding or a myth, is that resting is not productive. Rest is incredibly productive. Your brain is creating connections, synapses are forming. The most brilliant ideas are typically had during walks, drives, when you're in the shower, when you're not actively chasing them. So all that time when you're on and you're leaning in and you're pushing, it's like you're gathering information to make decisions. And then when you give yourself that break and you let it go, and you busy yourself with, going a long drive or walking or whatever it is you're going to do, it allows your subconscious to make those connections and to complete the processing of information. So what happens when we start to allow ourselves breaks and white space in our life is that we actually become not like more productive as in more busy, we become less busy, but more effective. And so the idea of productivity as being linear, you have to be on and you have to be making something or doing something or checking off a checkbox, is incorrect, right? You'll be busy that way. You'll be busy. But busy is not a badge of honor. And busy is not the goal of your business. So I think that being really clear about what is our goal, what is our objective, and then allowing space for the serendipity, for the processing, for the synapses to form, for the brilliant ideas, and for rest, which is incredibly healing and is very, very productive. That ultimately helps us to become, like I said, way more efficient, less busy, more efficient, which ultimately is a good thing for your business and for your health and your family.
Yeah, that's very important. Now, actually, when we look about it, like I used to think, if we used to think when we are at school or university, right? w- Usually the C or D students like me, I guess. So we don't really study and prepare for the exam until the last day of the exam, right? You know that, right? So what happens is we stress out and we want to pass, but we stress out, but we don't want to study and prepare for it beforehand for a time for it starts a week or a month, right? So we stress out one day before. So we are stressed out, we are burnt out, we are not going to finish the material. So this is what happens to us as we grow now when we start working and having businesses. Like what happens is we neglect sometimes certain things that are important and we focus on the not important things like checking email, keeping checking our email, keeping checking social media, and we neglect the things that are important, for example, in our business or our lives. And after a week, you start thinking to yourself, oh, I didn't still not do that thing for my business or for my own benefit or for my own health, which is very weird. Like, why we as human are driven to neglect our own benefit? Like, this is very interesting.
Well, that's a good question. I think it's down to habit and a little bit of culture. So culturally, like I said, we praise and we I say worship at the altar of productivity and success. But we're not looking at the whole picture typically when we're doing these things. We're not looking at the time of rest. We're not looking at the time of contemplation. I think retrospectives are incredibly powerful. Taking that time to stop and assess and learn from what you did for the week, and acknowledging, what went well and what didn't go well. So there are definitely practices that are easy to incorporate, to reduce that constant, like being on the treadmill and just go, 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 go without really thinking. Or you can be busy thinking, but you're not allowing the thoughts to happen, or process, I think, organically or without structure, which is what would happen when you're resting or walking or doing things that give you that space.
Do you think that there is something that people can do to, for example, to push their energy further, that they will accomplish their tasks faster and they would not keep working at certain thing that would, for example, instead of taking 2 days for to do it, like it would take 30 minutes and finish with it, and just take the rest of these 2 days, for example, off and not do anything instead of keeping postponing or delaying things?
Mhm. Absolutely, yes. One of the things I work with people is finding time in their weeks, and usually we can cut out 20%, like cut down on their hours by 20% or more, just by application of a few simple principles. Simple, not necessarily easy. The first is being clear on your yes, and the second is energizing your being. And so by that I mean just basic self-care, like and resourcing your energy. And let me explain it a little bit better. So when you're going through life, you've got all these tasks, you've got all these responsibilities, you have all these things that you have to do, and we get caught up in the moment. We're not paying attention to what is draining us and what is filling us up. And so what we do is we take a pause and we look at maybe the past week of activities and think of them in terms of, is this bringing you energy or is it taking your energy away? Is this activity, is this person, is this place filling you up or draining you? And once we have that view of what is actually energizing you versus taking your energy away, then there's the third step, which I call asserting your voice. And it's essentially when you start delegating, minimizing, maybe straight up rejecting the tasks that are draining. And this has an exponential impact because you're getting rid of what's draining, you're lightening your load, you're also dramatically increasing your energy. And so when you are working, when you are getting the things done that you need to get done, you can go so much faster and so much more effectively because you've gotten rid of all the things that were draining you. And, by getting rid of, you could outsource, you could delegate, you could minimize, you could automate, or you could just straight get rid of it if it's not needed. So there's ways of getting stuff out of your life, stuff out of your business, stuff out of your routine that is just weighing you down and sucking up your time and energy.
Mm.
And so once we resource our energy by doing this, then usually people have many extra hours a week, if not a day.
Mm. So do you think that this is what you're talking about? I could relate to, for example, enjoying the things that we do, which is very important, right? And having support, for example. Do you think these are two also related? Because if I am enjoying what I am doing, I would accomplish it. I would accomplish it. Uh, I would not feel maybe the time, but it would take the right amount of time, I would guess. We won't postpone it and we won't like slack on it. It would take a right amount of time and the support is good. But if we are not enjoying what we do you think it's also a good idea, for example, to delegate to other people if we can do that instead of us having to do everything? It's like on the opposite side, people asking us for help and we say no. not saying yes to everything, like the movie. Yes, I think it's called yes. So we need to say no sometimes. So that's a good place to be in, and have people also do our work for us if that's applicable, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the biggest shifts that we make when we're trying to end burnout in our lives is going from, and I can do it all. I'm a super, I'm Superman, Superwoman. My reputation is built on how productive I am, how much of a perfectionist I am, how much I can get done for, others, into one of being a leader. And that can be taking leadership roles in your own home and delegating and training your family to pick up responsibilities and lighten that load. It could be becoming a leader within your work situation, in your business, like on an even deeper level where you're able to train, delegate, and manage others in a way that they can take care of the things that are not necessary for you to do yourself. And that should free you up to be able to think more strategically, to be able to be more effective when you're being productive, and essentially move your business forward faster.
Mm. Do you think that people should focus, as we mentioned earlier, we talked about internal and external, and I talked about that external is something we cannot control. So we as people should focus only on the internal factors that affect our of us as a humans and reflect on burnout, right? Do you think that's a true
I think
saying?
it's a good place to start. Um, it's a good place to start because we do have the most control over our own behaviors and our own mindset. And even though we have, here's the thing though, is even though we have the most control, it's sometimes the hardest place to do the work. Like the concepts are easy. I'm sorry, the concepts are simple, but the execution is not necessarily easy, especially if you're going back, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of behaving in a certain way, working, showing up to work in a certain way. It can be challenging to make those shifts. But I don't think we should ignore the external factors at all. If you're considering a client and you understand that they're not going to pay you what you're worth, take that into consideration because it will affect your energy levels. And if you take more and more clients like that, you will be sucked down, and your ability to be productive, to be able to show up, to be on fire is going to be diminished. So things like compensation, recognition, the workload itself, you have control over your workload more than you realize, more than you realize. So I think external factors do need to be considered, that not ignored. So yeah, and also as a business owner or as someone who's creating or designing a company, you are in charge of that culture. So you can design the culture in a way that can prevent burnout for you and for your employees. So you actually have a lot of control over these external factors that can lead to your own burnout and also impact the people that are working with you and for you.
Hmm. So that's very important. Now, throughout your experience, what do you think is the worst advice that you have ever heard or received in regards to burnout?
Oh, goodness, worst advice ever. I think it was so my burnout, I was in bed. I could not get up for over a month. And I went to the doctors and got all this work done, and they're like, there's nothing wrong with you other than that you're fried. Like physically, there's nothing wrong. And I think the worst thing that I heard at that point was, oh, it's because you're a mom. And I was like, what? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard because I see moms over at CrossFit lifting weights. I see moms at the park playing with their kids. I see moms in executive positions. It's not just because you're a mom. So I think anytime someone tries to, I think, disregard or diminish what you're experiencing with a label, I think that maybe it's wise to question that. So I think that it wasn't necessarily advice; it was more like a brush off. Don't take it seriously; it'll go away. It's not true. So I think that people, if someone's saying, "Oh, it's just because of this," stick a
Yeah.
label on it. That's why you're feeling this way. I would challenge that, question that.
Yeah. What do you think are the best tools, resources, or books for to help people in regards to being not burned out?
Absolutely. So I have a resource that I give for free for podcast listeners, which is essentially it's a cheat sheet to cut your hours by 20% or more. And it goes deeper into some of the principles that we've covered. And I think that's a really good place to start because I've read hundreds of books. And I know that you don't have time to read hundreds of books and figure out what the most effective principles are. So that's, something that I give away for free. And then as far as like strategies throughout the day, I think that the most important one is to know your yes. Be very, very clear on what it is that you're saying yes to, so that your no's can come more naturally and be easier. And then remembering that productivity is like a tide, is an ebb and flow. So be as intentional leaning in as intentional leaning out as you are leaning in. And then for that white space in life, when you're between meetings, when you're taking a break to the bathroom, when you have time, put your phone down. Let nothing happen. Allow yourself to experience boredom. And that is incredibly healing. It allows your brain to recover, and it'll help prevent burnout from happening.
No, definitely. That's very important. You have to know to take a rest sometimes, and it's good to actually take a rest. Go drink some tea sometimes, or coffee, or take a look at the sky. That's something is, and like you mentioned, some of the great ideas come when we are not really working hard, working our brain that hard to actually come up with these things. So we need these kind of silent moments in order for us to discover the certain things that we need to do in our lives, which is very important. So Hannah, where can people learn more about you, get in touch with you, and see what you do?
Absolutely. So you can find me at serenesuccess.net. And that free resource for slashing your hours is serenesuccess.net/pod, P-O-D. You can also find me at Hannah Tackett on LinkedIn.
Cool, awesome. Thank you very much, Hannah, for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Really insightful. We talked a lot about a lot of stuff. One of them is external and internal factors of burnout, being the helper, overachieving, and more like this. So people need to be aware. If we are not aware as human beings, we will just go through life, like I would say, like dumpling, or I don't know. So like animals, I guess, because this is what differentiates humans from other things, creature in the world, is that we have our brains, and we can like use it and be aware and think and make certain choices and decision, which is very important. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.